Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win or Lose Gaming. We have another brand new Abyss 12. So you know what that means? It's time for another Abyss 12 video! Woohoo! As usual, we're going to take a look at a free-to-play, friendly-ish approach and strategy for the brand new Abyss 12. Now, this new Abyss 12 has thrown us, I would say, some curveballs. Now, I don't think it's like incredibly difficult, but it's not incredibly easy either. And what's most important about it is kind of like the new stuff that we have to deal with. As usual, for these first impression of the new Abyss 12s, I'm going to take you guys through a free-to-play friendly-ish 4-star only approach and run. And then after that, we're going to do a quick little day 1 speed run, which I managed to actually have time for this Abyss 12, which is a lot of fun to do. So let's go through the two teams that I use for this Abyss 12. You'll be glad to see that we're actually using a double Pyro, double Geo team. You'll love to see it's actually been a while since I've busted out a team like this. But we have the Geo Traveler. That's right, we haven't seen our Geo Traveler friend in a very long time, but she is actually really good for this Abyss 12. Artifacts, she's just using kind of a run-of-the-mill Emblem of Severed Fates with crit, as well as the Favonius Sword, and finally, of course, you know, she's built with the for some burst damage right here. And up next, we have just a standard cookie cutter Sapwood Blade Bennett. He's got a decent amount of energy recharge, and of course he has his talents right there. Next we have Xiangling. So double Pyro very often runs Xiangling. Now I could have built her with a bit more elemental mastery, but I was like, whatever, you know, it's all good. It's not going to be that big of a deal, but there she is. And finally we have Ningguang, our second Geo character for this setup, and she is using the Widsit to the new Abyss, which I will talk about once we get to it. So there we go. That is the top half team. Very interesting team. And then we have the bottom half team. And the bottom half team is going to be a Hyper Bloom team. That's right. We've been seeing Hyper Bloom teams ever since the inception of Dendro for free-to-play approaches, but with a slightly different driver this time. And the driver for this team is actually going to be Reminette, and you'll see how he plays a very crucial role. Our little underdog diving boy. You love to see it. And up next we have Kuki Shinobu. You're going to be shocked to see that she's using the extremely innovative, never before seen Hyper Bloom build, Iron Sting, Elemental Mastery, just all Elemental Mastery. You see she's up to 970 Elemental Mastery. And then we have Kole, Energy Recharge, Favonius, Warbow Focus build. She's just got a decent amount of crit rate, as well as a decent amount of energy recharge. This way she can maintain good burst uptime, as well as apply the Deepwood Memories buff for Hyper Bloom damage. And finally we have Xingqiu, same as always, very mediocre crit ratios, but above average energy recharge stat, because all I care about really is uptime, as well as, you know, a little bit of damage doesn't hurt. Without further ado, we've seen the teams. Let's go ahead and take a look at the runs, and I will commentate as we watch the runs. Now, for this Abyss 12, for the top half, we actually have kind of a more boss-focused enemies. We have the Perpetual Mechanical Array, which I'm sure many of you guys are quite familiar with. Perpetual Mechanical Array, it does a couple, I believe 2 to 3 attack cycles before it goes into panic mode. Or if you do enough damage to it, which is roughly, I would say, about 2/3 of its health, you can prematurely knock it into its panic mode, where you guys will see very shortly what it does. Now, for this rotation, what's really cool is that you can grab the crystallizes, which actually plays really well into the current Blessing of Abyssal Moon, which gives you 15% bonus damage for each crystallize you pick up for 8 seconds, something like that. Now, you want to find the robot with the swirly, shiny golden thing around it. And ideally, it's either going to be the Dorito bot, which is the lowest HP and also doesn't have a bunch of stupid mechanics, or the Squid, which has more HP and longer invincibility frames, but at the very least, it just stands there and takes it. It's not like the crab, it's not like the snake, which burrow and they're super annoying to deal with. But anyway, you knock down the PMA, and now it's going to be super vulnerable to your attacks. I believe it has much lowered resistances, and we can see here that we are just wailing on it. And I think I'm a little bit conservative with the rotation here, because I'm just going to build up some energy for the next chamber. which makes a lot of sense because, you know, if you don't have any energy, it makes it a lot more difficult when it comes to dealing with the second side. Now, the second side, it's the Electro-Oceanid, and you kind of have to roughly, you know, time your melee attacks for when it's not in the air. But as we can see, once, you know, Freminid kind of gets rolling here, he's able to output some nice non-negligible damage here, which is incredible. Now, I'm actually not sure if I showed his build in the build part, but he's using the Tidal Shadow. Kuki Shinobu will easily be able to keep the buff active. Freminid with a couple constellations also, you know, doesn't have too many energy issues. A little bit of energy is nice. But we can see here that I'm just kind of chasing it around, using Freminid's nice AoE attacks as well on when he whacks his little penguin friend. It actually has a very nice vertical hitbox. But we can see here just standard Hyper Bloom rotations. Honestly, 12-1 isn't really that remarkable. It's probably, I would say, one of the easier chambers here, but, you know, as long as you kind of know how the Electro-Oceanid and the Perpetual Mechanical Array work, you can see that Hyper Bloom, as well as Freminid's little bonus damage, is definitely making quick work of 12-1. Now, for 12-2, I think this was probably the most difficult chamber overall, and we can see here that I'm actually actively avoiding to kind of use the Geo Traveler's rock thing unless I can kind of make it explode on itself, because that way the robots don't get stuck on top of the rocks, which I had multiple issues with. And it's also pretty tricky to get Ningguang's screens here to be active because of all the Geoconstructs. Ningguang's screen is a very fat Geoconstruct, so it takes up a lot of space. And if you know anything about Geoconstructs, which I don't blame you if you don't, because it's been a long time since we've even dealt with Geoconstructs, but basically they take up space and they can't overlap on each other, at least most of them can't. So because of that, you can see there I failed to place down Ningguang's screens, which does hurt her damage a lot. This rotation was an absolute atrocity. But despite that, we still managed to clear it in time, and even though we have some energy issues for the next wave, oh well, it's all good. Hopefully things will work out, which, well, clearly they did, because, you know, I'm recording this video. So this one here is interesting, because I found that you kind of want to put one of the Geospecters in between you and the slimes, that way you're able to kind of wall up them all together. Now, because we don't have any CC, we just have to kind of rely on this, the way it's, you know, kind of pushing the enemies towards each other like this. Now, what's interesting here is that Freminid was actually extremely important here because he does heavy attacks. And heavy attacks will blow up the Geo Slime shields. As we can see, their shields did not last long. And unfortunately, with most other characters, those Geo shields are going to last a long time unless you use heavy attacks, which are typically Geo attacks, Claymore attacks, plunge attacks, and perhaps overloaded as well, if I'm correct, but I'm actually not 100% sure about that, but I think overloaded as well counts as a heavy attack. Anyway, you guys can let me know down in the comments below. So next we just have the two Geo Vishaps. I didn't quite group them up properly, but fortunately, again, I don't think that matters too much. We do have a reasonable amount of leniency when it comes to time for these chambers. As we can see, we're now at the very last wave with the two Stonehide Lava Trolls. Now, the nice thing about the Lava Trolls is that they tend to group up. They're very aggressive, so you can see that they will just, you know, run straight at you, and they're going to stack on top of you, which will allow us to apply, obviously, more Hydro on both of them, as well as more Hyper Blooms. And Freminid's heavy attacks are going to absolutely shred through the Stonehide Lava Troll's Geo Shield, which is great because then they are much less aggressive and much less dangerous. And I'm not entirely sure if they take less damage. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I'm not sure if they take more damage after the shields are down. But anyway, this team is nice because Freminid actually does make use of all the reactions here, including both Electro and Cryo. Finally, we have kind of the big doozy of 4.3, which is going to be the 12-3-1. We have this new enemy here, the Hydro Tulpa. Now, Hydro Tulpa is a really interesting enemy because it always has Hydro on it. And that means that a lot of, you know, various things like swirling pyro on it isn't going to be possible, along with some other, you know, quite a few like weird things that end up going on because of it. But it will spawn its little buddy, which you definitely want to kill its little buddy as soon as possible because I believe it has increased damage reduction or something like that. But we can see the little buddy just died to, like, you know, tertiary side fire or whatever, but just hit that thing with anything and it will pretty much die. Now, one thing to note, the crystallizes here are incredible for survivability because crystallizes absorb the element. that it is composed of by, I believe, 2.5 times the efficiency, which, you know, if you're in Bennett's Circle, that means you're also going to get Vapor. Yeah, there's one of the little buddies that we can see get taken out. But if you're in Bennett's Circle, you're going to take Vaporizes, which hurt a ton because it doubles the damage on your characters. So the Hydro Crystallizes are extremely good for that purpose. Now for this one, I stand over here so that way I can get the Electro Lava Trails to jump towards me, which will allow me to kind of group them together. Now I should have stood a little bit close to them so they jumped a little sooner, but oh well. This is literally my second attempt at this after I realized the spawning patterns of the Electro Lava Trolls. So once they're grouped up though, it's easy pickings. As you can see, Reminette is shredding through their shields like butter, and I should have started Calais rotation there much sooner once I saw that, you know, the Dendra application stopped, but alas, we have some pretty shoddy runs here, and despite the shoddiness of the runs, we are still able to make it through. Absolutely no problem. Now, these ones will summon their little friends here, and, you know, if you've dealt with the summoners before, once you kill their little animal buddies, they will take a lot of damage and go into a stun state where they will, I believe, take increased damage. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, you can break their animal friends, so that way they just end up taking more damage. We can see here, excuse me, that I ended up focusing them down, and now they are just sitting ducks completely. Very easy to deal with once you've kind of, you know, have an idea. So yep, we can just see here standard Hyper Boom rotation, absolutely not an issue. Literally second try after I realized how the Electro Lava Troll spawned, and an easy 9-star Abyss for this Abyss 12. So I did a really quick day one speed run, and I guess I would call this kind of a lazy speed run. I didn't really try to optimize it, but just tried to basically single cycle everything so I could get this video out to you guys pretty quickly. When it comes to optimizing the perpetual mechanical array, this thing is super annoying to optimize for because, yeah, it's just really annoying. But anyway, we can see here that I wasted Bennett's Burst. In all honesty, I probably shouldn't have even used it there, because that way I don't have Bennett's Burst for the second part, or for, you know, 12-2-1. But oh well, not a big deal. You can see the perpetual mechanical array, same stuff as always. And the second one, due to Farina's massive bonus damage buff, Wanderer is actually able to single cycle all 4 of these robots, which is absolutely incredible. Now, I do think that, you know, a lot of DPS characters will actually be quite competitive for this, and this is just, you know, one very lazy day one approach, but we can see Wanderer absolutely blitzing through thanks to that massive damage buff from Farina, able to single cycle the entire thing. Now, this boss was absolutely hilarious actually, because I've died so many times to this thing. Wanderer just gets completely one-shot, and right there I was just surprised, like, okay, he's still alive, and somehow I didn't die there either. Basically, you cannot afford to get hit while you're in Bennett's burst there, because he will one-shot you, but we can see there, easy one cycle for Wanderer for that as well. So let's talk a little bit about some additional tips for this Abyss 12. And let's talk about the top half first, where we can see this lineup, the PMA, 3 robots, as well as the Hydro Tulpa. Now, the Hydro Tulpa is notable because it is completely immune to Hydro damage. This means that Hydro DPS characters like Valette are going to struggle quite a bit, as well as like certain archetypes where you bring Hydro characters. Those Hydro characters aren't really going to be contributing anything to the Hydro Tulpa. Now, another interesting thing is that physical DPS characters for the top half aren't great, because of all these robots, they have 70% physical resistance, where yes, you do have superconduct as well as other sources of physical resistance shred. You will still be doing a lot less damage in comparison to other elements of characters that you might be fighting here. Geo, obviously, for, you know, none of these enemies resist Geo, as well as you saw the power of Geo against the Hydro Tulpa, as well as the blessing of the Abyssal Moon favoring Geo right now, providing up to 45% bonus damage once you pick up 3 crystallizes. So Navia is going to be good for the top half, as well as Arataki Ito. So the Hydro Tulpa also allows you to apply Electro, I believe. And because you can apply Electro, that means that you can swirl Electro as well as use Electro DPS characters, in particular non-aggravate Electro DPS characters, to their fullest ability, which include Hyper Raiden, for example, or perhaps some kind of Yai Miko team that can also utilize it. However, those teams also do favor having Bennett on them, and without Geo, you're going to take a lot of damage, so be careful about that. If you run Hyper Raiden, you might get one shot by the Hydro Tulpa, especially without the crystallizes on your team. Now, Pyro DPS characters are also quite usable because they will automatically vape against the Hydro Tulpa. As we can see, the double Pyro, double Hydro team did quite well. So yeah, there's also that to keep in mind, but you can't swirl Pyro on it, but the vape alone will be worth it. It will make up for the lack of swirls overall. Now, let's next talk about the second half of Abyss 12. We have the Thundering Manifestation. We have these, a lot of Geo enemies here. And finally, we have this group of hodgepodge enemies here. Now, because of the lineup of enemies for the second half, Electro DPS characters are not recommended because this thing is completely immune to electro damage, as well as Geo damage is not really recommended because the Geo Spectre, Geo Slime are completely immune to Geo damage, as well as the Geo Vishaps and Stonehide Lava Turtle having high Geo resistances. So what does that leave us? Well, you can see that Hyper Bloom did extremely well. Dendro will do quite well as long as you have a way to break these slimes. So what do we need to actually break the Geo shields here? You want heavy attacks here for the Geo slimes. And Kazuha and Zhongli, they both fit in a ton of teams and they are absolutely able to destroy the Geo slimes. Animo DPS characters like Xiao will also do well because he can plunge and he will absolutely obliterate the Geo Slime shield. So if you have a decent Xiao team, he will do fine, especially against all the enemies here, actually, now that I'm looking at it. Yeah, I think that's really about it. I think this Abyss 12 has a little bit of kind of elements that you need to keep an eye on, like for example, avoiding Hydro, avoiding Geo and Electro for the second half. And besides that, really, it's not too difficult of an Abyss 12 with not too many gimmicks. So personally, I think this Abyss 12 wasn't too difficult, but it did have a few additional gimmicks. Let me know what you think about this Abyss 12, what you cleared it with down in the comments below, and whether or not you agree with me as to it being a little bit more easy than perhaps many of the Abyss 12s that we've seen to date. And if you also have any additional tips for dealing with kind of the new enemy, the Hydro Tulpa, leave it down in the comments below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Went to Lose, signing out.